This talk or this conversation is titled Activism as Practice. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a little bit of a meditation. Then Caspar and I will chat amongst ourselves about a couple of things that we find important and have noticed. And then there'll be time to ask questions, and we'll end with a little mantra. So let's just start with a little bit of mindfulness practice, actually. Don't know about you. I've just come back from a 2 weeks retreat and then spent quite a lot of time on Zoom, as some of you of us might have. So always helpful to just ground ourselves. So I've got my little bell. And just, maybe taking the time to feel your feet on the ground. Rest your hands and arms somewhere. Just arriving into your body. Noticing how you are. Noticing the breath. And noticing just our connection with the world via the feet, the surface we're sitting on, the air. We're in constant exchange with the world. Noticing any thoughts or questions, intention, any emotions. And then in a moment, I'm going to ring the bell again, and you can open your eyes again. Feeling already a little bit calmer, so that's fantastic. So actually we start a lot of our meetings, and even when we meet to protest with meditation, or at least a short mindfulness practice. So we thought we'd do that today as well. Okay, so I'm going to ask Caspar the first question. And I mean, it's just, I guess some people in the audience will have been part of protests and demonstrations, and maybe even with Extinction Rebellion. Others might not have been. So could you just talk about a particular protest or a particular situation you've been part of, and how that looked like and how that was for you, Caspar?
Thanks, Katja. I'm remembering being arrested about this time 12 months ago. Sachi has been arrested 5 times now, so in some ways I've got some catching up to do. I'd been through various trainings, I'd spoken to other people who'd been arrested, so I had some sense of what that was like, and that I might have some capacity to do this once during the week that I was spending in London. And on the first day of this rebellion 12 months ago, which I think maybe was a Tuesday following a bank holiday weekend, it doesn't matter, we marched with the whole of XR Buddhist marched from Trafalgar Square down to Parliament Square. So we'd got our banners, we'd heard lots of speeches about climate justice and social justice and so on, and we came to this space outside the House of Parliament, and we'd been told, you have permission to be on the grass during the daytime hours. You can protest there. Like if you're well behaved, you can protest here in a way that doesn't cause any disruption and that really allows the politicians to ignore what you're doing and just carry on with business as usual. I guess that was the subtext of that. So very quickly, people spilled into the roads around Parliament Square. And I spotted a friend in the road, and gradually a few Buddhists ended up sitting in the road together. Somebody noticed that at the junction, there was a line of policemen in high-vis jackets, arm next to arm, no gaps in between them. And then there was maybe about 6 meters of clear space before the first protesters were sat in the road. And someone said, should we go and sit in that space? Otherwise, those police people will walk forwards and we'll be a little bit disruptive, we'll be less disruptive because they'll have taken some of the road back. So we went and sat in that space. We took our meditation cushions if we'd got them. I just rolled up my coat inside my rucksack and sat on that. And we meditated in the road. And the afternoon ticked on, the minutes became hours. I went for a toilet break at some point and came back, and we were all still sat in the road, settled back into my cushion. I've never been photographed so many times as when I was sat meditating in that place. I felt very calm, very grounded. And I had a very strong sense of this is exactly the right place to be in this moment. I was already bought into the idea of causing some level of disruption, and it seemed really important not to play within the rules that we'd been outlined. And then towards the end of the afternoon, the police started approaching protesters one by one and letting them know if they weren't going to move from this place, they'd be arrested. And I thought, oh, is this, am I going to choose to stay here or will I move? And it deeply intuitively felt like it's important to stay here. So I carried on meditating, occasionally opening my eyes and seeing one by one protesters either being carried away or agreeing to walk away. And then ultimately, it was my turn. I had a little chat with the policeman. I could feel myself becoming frustrated because how absurd. I thought I spent my whole life following rules, and here I am speaking to a policeman who wants to take me away because I kind of feel like my hand has been forced into taking a more extreme level of action. Yeah, and I said I wasn't going to move, so they arrested me. And I guess there's more to that story, how that unfolded following that. I had this fantasy that I would just meditate and kind of really be doing loving kindness meditation to all the police when I was in the cell. And it wasn't like that at all, actually. I became a bit frozen, but I'm really pleased that I did that. And I'm looking forward is the wrong word, but I'm pleased to feel resourced enough to be thinking about doing that again in November around the COP26 conference. Yeah, how about you, Katja? Can you tell us about a time like that?
Yeah, thank you. And I do remember that day as well. And yeah, you're right. So many pictures were taken. And the pictures are quite powerful because there are so many police and a few Buddhists sitting there. Yeah, so yeah, what comes to my mind is a protest I was part just a few weeks ago, or it might now be almost a month. So I'm part of Extinction Rebellion Buddhists, but I also sometimes join Doctors for Extinction Rebellion as a healthcare professional. I'm trained in public health, and so for me, the health impacts of climate change are also just quite central to how I think about climate change and also my work. And so we were planning this action at JP Morgan, which is one of or actually the biggest funder of fossil fuels. And there was quite a lot of toing and froing and about all eventualities of what might happen. And it was really, really interesting. And the night before the action, because I had to get up really early in the morning. I really remember going to bed, doing a little in bed, doing some meditation before I went to sleep. And just remembering the sense of grief, but also this feeling of we are in a dire situation and I'm ready to do what it takes. And that's my offering to the world. And so in the morning, when we met at Canary Wharf with everybody involved, things didn't quite go to plan. They didn't go to plan at all. We had a particular plan of what was supposed to happen and where the banner should go and where everybody was supposed to be, so to get our message across. And it didn't work out. There was a lot of security. It looked like they were prepared. And another part of our action was a sort of die-in where we, dressed in our scrubs, would be lying on the ground. And JP Morgan and Canary Wharf weren't very patient with having people of different opinions there. So after like 40 minutes, they asked us to leave. And in that moment, it just felt like the only other way I can make my voice heard in this situation is I will just lie down, stay on the ground, and then they would have to carry me away, which the private security did. And there was already quite a lot of national media there, and so it was on various news outlets and Twitter and whatnot. But I think in that moment, I felt really, really connected to my values and what's really important to me. And I felt really open and really spacious. I didn't feel any ill will towards the security or the police or the people working in the bank or the manager or even the executive. I just felt really open, really able to respond to the situation. So they could only bring us to the next the tube station, basically, because that's public land. And so we continued our protest there. And in the end, we got into a lot of conversation with passers-by, people who were just in Canary Wharf for whatever reason, but also people who were working at JP Morgan. There was a lot of dialogue, and it felt really, really meaningful. So I think that's really, I think that's been, in terms of like the last rebellion, that's been sort of like the most significant, the most meaningful action for me that I was part of. And because I could really notice, I was able to sort of like step into something wider, more open, be more responsive in a way. Yeah. So, I mean, it's quite interesting because we've had during the conference, obviously, lots of different approaches and opinions. And nonviolent direct action is just one of the responses to the climate and ecological emergency. And there's many other things people do and can do, and some people obviously still think that what Extinction Rebellion does, or non-violent direct action, is a bit extreme. So Casper, why is non-violent direct action important?
Thank you. somebody said to me recently, the Buddha gave advice to kings. Why don't you just do that? And in a way, it sort of highlighted to me why NVDA is so important, because the Buddha was born into a, what we use the shorthand to say that the Buddha was born into a royal family. Even as a spiritual leader, that's a very easy way into getting the ear of other kings in the area. And the Buddha did give them lots of advice, and sometimes they took it and sometimes they didn't take it. I am not going to be invited into 10 Downing Street because I don't have that sort of background. I don't have that sort of status. I can't buy a dinner or a lobbying firm. So I have relatively little power in the system. I can vote, but democracy is broken in various ways, from the first past the post system to the way that the media constructs narratives around elections. So I have very little power there as well. So creating some level of disruption allows us to have a voice that we wouldn't be able to have otherwise. And we're looking back through history to people like the suffragettes, to the Salt March that Gandhi did, seeing how powerful those things were to disrupt the ordinary structure of society. And it's non-violent, and being non-violent means that, as well as being really aligned with my Buddhist practice from that point of view, it actually becomes harder and harder to argue with, because you're continually in the reasonable position. And as I said at the beginning, when the Buddha was speaking to kings, sometimes the kings took that advice and sometimes they didn't. And when they didn't, often lives were lost. There's a famous example of the Buddha trying to cancel, I can't remember, to cancel a leader out of war, for example. And in this situation, if the advice isn't followed, if urgent action isn't taken, there will be severe, drastic consequences. So anything that amplifies our voices and raises the alarm to the extent that people start to take notice seems like a good thing to do to me. Yeah. What about you, Katja? How do you get your head around the value of NVDA?
Yeah, thank you. I guess where I'm sort of at with it is, I don't know, when I was, 20 years ago, when I was a teenager, I was part of Greenpeace. I was part of the Young Green Party. I wrote petitions and letters, and I still do that. I write to my MP. I am vegan, trying to fly less, try to talk. In some I've been in past workplaces, the slightly annoying person who, I don't know, points out that the lights need to be switched off. I see Angela laughing. The lights needs to be switched off, and can we have recycled paper and that sort of stuff. And I vote in elections and that sort of stuff. So it's not that I've done nothing and then I do nonviolent direct action. I think what made a deep impression on me was when I'm originally from Germany, and when I came here, and just to experience, just the current, I would say, the democratic deficit around like the election system, Brexit, all of that, feeling like there is the stakes are really high, but the sort of like day-to-day political work of with those who should have our best interests at heart is taken up by other things that don't address some of the fundamental challenges we're facing, like climate change. And I had been I was part of protests when I was younger, particularly around like protests against like fascism and other things. And it always struck me that it was a bit sort of like us and them. There was a lot of anger in activists, and that around me, I could see that, and burnout. And so I had sort of like taken a step back from that, because it didn't feel that didn't feel the right place for me. But just like, yeah, when I came in, just like how the situation unfolded, I just felt like, okay, maybe it is actually so dire now that more extreme responses are appropriate. And I have found within Extinction Rebellion, I don't agree with everything that Extinction Rebellion does, but I have found a movement and people who largely agree with my values, and where I feel I can be myself, and I can step up in a certain way. And some of that, and it's still like, even as being part of Extinction Rebellion Buddhists, some of what I do is leading meditations and meetings, some of it is holding a vigil, and some of it is blocking a road. It's one of the expressions of that, not the only one, but it is an important one. And I do believe that some of the reasons why I think the public dialogue around climate change has changed quite a lot in the last few years has also been because of Fridays for Futures and Extinction Rebellion. I know that's a bit controversial. Not all of my friends agree, but I do think that it's effective, or it has been effective. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess another question that we'll, I guess, both be grappling with is, how do you make sense of your activism as a Buddhist, Caspar?
Thank you. Just on that last thing you said, Katja, I know there have been several climate scientists who would agree that XR and the school strike shifted the conversation around the climate crisis as well, and are grateful for that. How do I make sense of my activism as a Buddhist? You know, sometimes I think I don't need to make sense of my activism as a Buddhist. It's really like, both are just really important things. And whether or not it makes sense, whether or not I can make sense of it as a Buddhist, I should still be doing the activism, because we're in an emergency and something needs to change. And yet, having said that, of course, there are lots of different ways that I make sense of my activism as a Buddhist. And one of those, it kind of picks up on some of what you were saying, Katja, about previous protests that you've been in, and then protesting with XR, and particularly XR Buddhists, is that for me, part of the power of what we're offering is that we're embodying a different way of being in the midst of a kind of endgame capitalist high consumer culture, by taking our meditation practice into the streets, whether that's like in a big disruptive way, like in a road, or whether we're just holding vigil or doing walking meditation through a city centre. So something about that modeling of a different way of being is really important and fits my Buddhist values. And the other thing I would say is that 2,500 years ago, the Buddha made a response to the conditions that he found himself in, both in terms of his own life and the suffering that he encountered in his own life, and the world situation to some degree. And his response was to make community, to make a religious community, and to guide people towards awakening. It's impossible to know what the Buddha, what Shakyamuni Buddha would be doing if he was living through this time of the climate crisis and the ecological emergency. But the Buddha that springs out of the pages of the suttas and the sutras, to me, is one that is continually responding with compassion and loving kindness and vigor and all of those parameters and other good qualities. So regardless of whether what we do fits into some past form that Buddhism has taken, for me, if I'm really touching into my heart and responding from a place of loving kindness and compassion and non-judgment, then that's my Buddhist practice. Any action that I do out of that is my Buddhist practice. And for me, responding to this crisis from that place is one of the most important things we can do. So that's how I'm joining things up in my mind. Katja, how about you?
Yeah, I really resonate with that. Yeah, looking for a compassionate response. Yeah. I think well, I think there are several things. What comes to mind is Joanna Macy, which she's been quoted a lot during this conference, obviously, about like the three kinds of activism, the sort of like changing of consciousness, the sort of building a new world, and holding actions. And so this is only sort of one shape which activism can take. And I do also participate in the other two. I meditate, and I'm trying to build Sangha. I'm trying to, yeah, in a way, as you've also said earlier, sort of like show a different way of being, be part of a different way of being. And I think that's really important. And I think it's, yeah, I think there is something around how a compassionate response, I guess ultimately, I think when we both when we talked to David Lloyd, it was this sort of like, how does an appropriate response look like? He also said this in his talk later, and I think that is just a constant question that is sort of like constantly under review for me. So even when I am participating in a particular protest, it's sort of like, does what's happening, does that resonate with my understanding of nonviolence? Does that resonate with my understanding of compassion? And it might not, or it might. You yourself. Thank you. And so I think it's a sort of like it's an ongoing conundrum. It's not that I've once decided that that's what it looks like, but yeah, it sort of like needs feeling into in every particular situation. And yeah, and I think there is also something about, for me, that there is the climate and ecological emergency, but also I think I recognize these as interconnected crises, and I recognize that we need to take other people on board in order to address the challenge we're facing. So I think it's really important to be inclusive in the way we act. And I think that's some of what I'm trying to embody with some of the ways I'm involved in Extinction Rebellion, with hoping to, or like participating and enabling certain protests which help different communities to participate and show make their voices heard, basically. And and then I think I personally also just really benefit from, it can be quite an intense context, a particular protest. There might be quite a lot going on. There might be tension, people disagreeing, just a lot of like hustle, but sort of like just a lot of like sounds and traffic. And recently I read Reginald Ray, and he said something about like that actually meditating outside, meditating in conditions that are not calm and peaceful is quite a good practice for the bardo. And I like that. I think it's definitely providing me with a sort of like crucible where, yeah, I'm facing my fears and some of my conditioning. I'm also incredibly sort of like, I just want to blend in and assimilate most of the time. Yeah, so I don't really like obstruct or getting in the way or causing disagreements. And so I have to work with that. And yeah, and I think that's sort of like where I appreciate Extinction Rebellion Buddhists. I think there is something about like, what do we bring to Extinction Rebellion? What does Extinction Rebellion bring to us? And I think I find in Extinction Rebellion a context that resonates with my values, but also I know that our presence at protests really means something to other activists. We get this feedback so often about like just the impact it has and the atmosphere it creates, and that people can really, really feel that. And so I think there is that as well. And that is not to be underestimated, particularly if emotions can sort of like get a bit sort of like high. And personally, I value the sort of like ecumenical or even interfaith aspect, because we also sometimes or quite frequently actually naturally come together with Christians and Muslims and Jews. And I think there is a really powerful message in that as well. So I think these are, yeah, I guess some of the ways in which it's meaningful to me as a Buddhist. Yeah. Anyway, I think we've sort of reached the end of our questions that we sort of thought about. Caspar, is there anything you want to say? Otherwise, we might open it up to questions now.
Yeah, let's open it up to questions. I don't know. Is Akash Raj's videos off? Are you there, Akash Raj? And are you happy to moderate some questions, or should we just keep our eyes open?
There's one thing while he sort of like gathers himself, I do want to just mention, because I think it does get, and the question will probably come up anyway, which is that, so for example, you brought this wonderful example of how you got arrested, Caspar. So I, for a long time, really tried to avoid to get arrested for various reasons. And I still have not been arrested, and there is space for that too. And I don't feel like I'm any less of an activist or am any less effective because of that. So for any person who gets arrested for the protest to happen, so many other things, so many other conditions need to be in place. And so, yeah, I think that's just really important to keep in mind.
Sorry, I vanished there. I just needed to kind of get up and walk about a little bit. Do you want me to moderate the questions, or, I mean, they're going to everyone anyway.
There's one in the chat now. I'm often challenged about my XR actions being non-harm, even if it's only disruptive, and operating from a power mode based on my view of the world. How do you respond to this? A friend of mine was talking to me recently about leaving a controlling relationship, and she was worried that she couldn't find a way of doing that without hurting the person she was in a relationship with. There would definitely be some pain caused to this other person in her leaving. And for her, at some point, it may be exactly the right thing to do for her own safety, but also in that leaving, it presents an opportunity for the other person to examine their part. And they may or may not take that invitation up. And this is kind of how it is in samsara. You know, we have to choose the actions that we take. It's sometimes impossible to choose actions that won't harm anybody. And sometimes the action that has the potential to produce the most liberation does create some level of disruption. So for me, I'm really comfortable with producing some level of disruption, and then maybe other levels are a bit more uncomfortable, and each person needs to find where they draw that line for themselves. I'm not entirely sure what the second part of the question means. I don't know if you can help with that, Katya.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Sangharakshita talks quite a lot about like the love mode and the power mode, and that we should avoid the power modes. Yeah. So I think that's why I really value activism in a deliberately Buddhist context, because we can have these conversations around like, oh, what was actually my mental state when I did that? And am I actually getting into anger, into us and them, into separating? I think that's what I really, really value about this. And I have to watch myself. So as I described in that particular, that action that I described earlier, where I mean, I'm not enlightened, but I'm pretty sure I did not act from the power mode, and that was not how it felt. And I do know how power mode feels. It can be quite painful. But in other, yeah, I think in other forums where I might have to interact with the police, it's I really, and it is, I have taken that also as a deliberate practice to not other, and to really yeah, make this my practice to see, to feel compassion for everybody involved in the situation, even if I don't agree or feel that they're causing harm. And but it is a challenge. But yeah, I think for me, it's one of that particular question about like, what was actually my mental state? Was it love mode or power mode? That is for me one of the reasons why I value activism in a deliberately Buddhist context.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, for me, activism and practice become the same thing in that sense. When we're doing what you describe, and that's really important. And when we can't, you know, when we're beginning to lose ourselves and lose our mindfulness, and that's the time to come away from the front line and come back into retreat and more contemplation. And there's this dance between taking care of ourselves and going out onto the streets, and that's partly for our own self, but it's also because it's really important that we can more or less be coming from this place of non-harm and compassion. Yeah, thanks, Christine, reminding us that for every arrestable person, there's about 9 or 10 non-arrestable people that need to be involved in the movement to make that happen. Absolutely, that's really important.
Any more questions or comments? We've got some time. VJ, you've got your hand up. Sorry, I don't know your full name. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah, fantastic. You're on mute now, so we can't hear you now. Do press the button again.
Okay, got it. Okay, yeah, I'm I'm out and about, so I'm on my mobile, so I thought I'd just speak. Yeah, I suppose I'd just like to say that I think we don't want to underestimate the power of just exemplification on XR protests, even within non sort of explicitly Buddhist sort of type actions. I've been involved in several sort of more traditional, quite spicy exile actions and got arrested and stuff. But over the time I've been involved with XR, I've made some very good connections, and like people have joined, for instance, Buddha Field team, and got into meditation and sort of got, you know, all sorts of, in a way, sort of added sort of influence, just because people know I'm a Buddhist and people know that I'm coming out of a particular angle, and I'm always sort of you know, I've got this very much in mind that if I'm interacting with the police or interacting with other exile people, it's I don't lose my cool very often, and people actually appreciate this. So it's yeah, I think we are, you know, the Buddhists do have a very strong influence on the exile movement, and in whatever way people do sort of engage in XR, I think it's only for the better if there's more Buddhists around.
Thank you.
There's a really good question about, sorry, Caspar. I've just picked up a really good question from Melanie, which is, can anger ever be appropriate in such contexts as fuel, as motivation, as moral outrage, or is anger always destructive?
The traditional Buddhist answer, I think, is that it can be useful, but it's really tricky. So it's one of those things that people wield skillfully when they're enlightened or very close to enlightenment. For me, it's a really normal reaction, and it's really important to take care of it and to recognize it and allow it, whether that's in a sharing space with others or within my own meditation practice. And having those practices as a container does allow for some digestion of that, and it can become transformed into energy that is really useful. So there's certainly ways of working with it. Do you want to say anything about that, Katja?
No, I totally agree with what you said. And somebody has also just posted that Shantigava talks about this in his new book. So
Great.
Yes, do have a read.
Yeah.
So we've got about 3 minutes remaining time if you want to just pick another couple of questions to briefly answer before we have to wind up.
So I think Felix's question is quite interesting. Are there other forms of activism than direct action that you think are important? So I think we need all forms of activism, all of them. And I think it is all of everybody's individual task to look at their skills and their situation in life and decide where they can be most effective, basically. And for some of us, that might be blocking a road or getting arrested. And for a lot of us, that might not be the thing. So as I said, I'm also not just doing one thing. My work now has to do with climate change and getting a pretty big organization to get to net zero. So I think we need all forms of activism, and that's how I would sort of like look at that. Caspar, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's important to be a broad church, but I do think that it's a really important piece, one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, because it does pull the conversation over in a really important way, and it does create the space for other forms of activism to kind of be listened to and engaged with. There's a part of me sometimes when I see people sending their thanks or thoughts and prayers, and you often get a lot of this on a Facebook post in response to doing an action. It's lovely to have people's thanks and thoughts and prayers, but occasionally I just think, oh, I don't want any more thanks, just come and stand next to me, please. But yes, there's certainly a place for lots of different forms of activism.
Well, I think we're probably out of time, so it's 6:20, and the final concluding event for the conference starts at 5:30, which is our Shambhala warrior mind training puja that Shantigaba will lead. But I'd really just like to thank you both very, very much for coming here and as people directly involved in Extinction Rebellion and putting arguments and putting your case across and your beliefs across and your convictions across in such a cogent and convincing way.
Thank you. Can I just put a plug for the
next session's not till 7.
Not till 7.
Okay.
People are scheduled for this. So
Oh,
if you do want to
I thought it said an hour on the spreadsheet.
They do. They have the full hour exactly because the next session's not till 7 o'clock.
Yeah, but it says it started at 5:30 on my thing, so that would. But you can go ahead. That means carry on to 6:30. I do apologise, or even a bit longer. Yes, having prematurely brought everything to a close.
Thank you.
I will retract all of that and just please,
Well,
carry
it sounds
on.
like we're moving into the end stages anyway, and
Yes, but we don't
I
need
know
to.
people have on Zoom for a long time today as well. I'm going to put the website in the chat, but you can easily Google Extinction Rebellion Buddhists, and there's lots of resources on there. There's talks and articles and so on. There's also a list of events, and you can sign up to the newsletter and so on if you want to find out more about what we're doing. Particularly the thing we're working on at the moment is working out how we're going to respond to COP26, which will include some of us being present in Glasgow in November. So if you want to make some kind of response to that within the context of Exile Buddhists, from wherever you are, do get in touch and we'll find a place for you.
And we're also running sort of like welcome sessions regularly. I think the next one is next Tuesday, actually. So so that's another option if you for all of those of you who've got more questions. And there is a question if we can share a link to the David Loy interview. Have you got the link available?
Yeah.
So like Caspar, I haven't quite got it to hand.
Sure, yeah, it's on the
You tell me where it is, I'll
2
find
seconds.
it, quickly pop it in.
So in the meantime, I've noticed that Kerry has a hand up, and she had a hand up earlier as well. So Kerry, if you might want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry, I just pressed the wrong thing. I didn't mean to.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I'm on my phone too, so it's a bit awkward.
No
I'm
problem.
holding it.
And I've lost the Zoom window where you all are. Oh, there you are. But there's the link to the David Loy. I've just sent that to one person. Let me try again. Sorry. That's the link to the David Loy conversation that we had a couple of weeks
Okay,
ago.
great. So, I mean, there are some. Sorry, no, catch it, please.
And I was to say, Christine just asked about training. So there are loads of trainings, particularly, I mean, for me, I found it really helpful. Obviously, non-violent communication and de-escalation is super, super helpful. And Shantigaba is one of the people who provides that training. I think also everything that has to do like with legal aspects of the situation and your rights as a protester and that sort of stuff, I've also found super, super helpful just to sort of know what I'm getting myself into. But there are also, there are lots of other trainings as well.
Yeah, and we'll highlight some of those in the next newsletter that goes out, but they're all available. All the calendar and stuff is available on the main XR website. And if you're going to get involved, particularly if you're going to be present in person, it's really important to do at least one or two of those, I would say.
Okay, shall we then, because we were going to end with a mantra, so there is a final opportunity to ask a question. Okay. What is Extinction Rebellion asking specifically for from COP26? Do you have any reason to believe it will be successful?
Do you mean that the conference will be successful? I mean, it will be somewhat successful, and it probably won't be successful enough, is my sense, in which will probably be how the whole response to the climate crisis continues to unfold, that some things are happening and probably not as many as the things that we would like to see, which is why that we'll keep the pressure on. XR's demands will be the same, that we are calling for governments to tell the truth about the climate crisis in a very clear way, to take urgent action, and particularly through using citizens' assemblies.
Yeah. Okay, shall we draw this ritually to a close?
Thank you. So I'm going to offer a mantra to Amitabha, which is the Buddha that I practice with, particularly that quality of accepting all beings just as they are. Really important in this kind of protest context to know that, one, individually I can be in receipt of this loving kindness from the Buddha, but two, that field is available for everybody regardless of where they're standing in relationship to the climate crisis. So I'm just going to sing the word Amitabha in quite a simple tune. Feel free to join in if that's appropriate in the spaces that you're in, or we'll just do that for a couple of minutes and then go into silence. Amitabha, 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 Amitabha. So I pray that, supported by our deepest sense of refuge, we're all able to find our own appropriate response to the climate crisis and ecological emergency. May all beings be happy, may all beings be well, may all beings be free from suffering. Thank you.